Well, thank you very much for this introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure and honor to be here, and I see that this colloquium has started extremely well. I was very impressed by what we heard just a few minutes ago about the El Salvador Truth Commission. Now you have two people from the Guatemalan Truth Commission present here, not as impressive as on video, but in flesh and blood here. Let me just say very few words about the background, because many people, when they hear Guatemala, they think of bloodshed, violence, and other evil deeds. But looking back to the past, we should recall that at the end of World War II, Guatemala was a country of liberal democracy with rights and freedoms which were observed and appreciated. Guatemala was considered to be one of the best countries of Latin America. Intellectuals from all over the continent came to Guatemala to enjoy the rights and freedoms guaranteed under the Guatemalan liberal regime of governance. And a brutal end was put to that by the coup which eliminated Arbenz, the leader of the country. That was a putsch where, unfortunately, the United States played a central role. And this is something which should not be forgotten, that the United States was instrumental in overthrowing the liberal government which had power in that country. And then for more or less 30 years, there was a sequence of military dictatorships until, 1996, while in 1985 a new constitution was adopted, and then finally in 1996 the final peace accord was signed, and the country seemed to be heading for a new era of peace and well-being for everyone. And one element of that truth, that final peace agreement, was the establishment of the Truth Commission that had been, whose creation had been determined beforehand, but which could not become operative before the final peace accord had been concluded. I was contacted, and that is a strange thing, to have a foreigner in that commission. Two Guatemalans, Otilia Lustegoti, of Mayan origin, and Alfredo Valcez, and a lawyer who had always defended the cause of justice, even during the dictatorship. He had never bowed to the dictatorship. He had an honorable reputation in Guatemala, so he was, I think, choice number one among those who could integrate the commission. Well, the three of us, we didn't know one another. We came together on the first day, and let me just start, instead of speaking of achievements, I start out with some difficulties, obstacles, which we encountered. The first message was, there's no money. We were not a UN commission. The peace negotiations had been mediated by a high official, a Frenchman from the UN Secretariat, and originally it had been planned to put him into the post of coordinator of the Truth Commission, but he was appointed head of the Minugua mission in Guatemala, so he could not possibly discharge the two functions, on the one hand being the head of Minugua to supervise the implementation of the peace agreement, and on the other hand to be the head of the Truth Commission that had to look to the past. And then they looked for someone else, and they found me. I had been the rapporteur for the UN Human Rights Commission, as Lisa said a moment ago, from 90 to 93. 93, I knew a little bit of Guatemala. I had met many people. I had traveled the country to a great extent. I had to travel many times by helicopter, which caused me many anxieties, I must say. To be on those helicopters in the mountainous regions of Guatemala, well, it's not a wonderful feeling. And why did they? Well, there was the example, of course, of the Salvador Truth Commission, where you had 3 foreigners. Now, in Guatemalan society was not so divided that it seemed to be impossible to choose a Guatemalan for the commission, but they thought I was not present when they drafted the accord, no? That a kind of moderating element, a kind of neutral element would be useful for that commission. And it was not a only male commission, as you can see. In that regard, it was well balanced, and the foreigner, that was me, was there to ensure some kind of neutrality. And I accepted it, being at that time a member of the UN International Law Commission present in Geneva. That is a new experience because in Argentina and Chile, as you know, the members had been exclusively nationals of the country. In South Africa, it was the same. We were a small commission, so therefore the scope of our competences could not be as broad as the scope of the South African Truth Commission. Many people compared us with the South African Truth Commission, but we could not possibly grant any amnesties because we had, and again the time problem came up already at the beginning, 6 months also had been provided for, that could be possibly extended a little bit, but this shows this limit of 6 months that was contained in the accord on the Truth Commission showed very clearly that none of the parties was much too happy with the Truth Commission, no? They had to accept the Truth Commission because there was some pressure from civil society. There had been the example of Chile, Argentina, of El Salvador. Now that seemed to be obligatory Latin American model to have also a Truth Commission after a period of national disaster to bring the country back to the path of the rule of law. And 6 months, to cover a period of almost 30 years in 6 months, it was really impossible. It showed that, they had no real trust in the Truth Commission. And that has remained a feature of our work as from the very beginning to the end of the Truth Commission. The government of Guatemala, I think that was also from the diplomatic ceremonial, was not correct. They never received us for an official visit. The 3 of us, I had meetings with the president, with ministers. I think Otilia too had individual encounters with ministers, but the 3 of us as a commission, we were never received by the government, and At the end, also, there was nothing of that kind. There was a prevailing opinion in the government, if I may say it in somewhat drastic terms. Many people in the government, maybe not the entire government, saw us as a kind of left-leaning bunch of people who were kind of intruders in Guatemalan society. That was the prevailing attitude until the end. Some left-leaning complicity which did not, in a proper way, consider Guatemalan realities. I don't know whether I should talk about this money question. Maybe this is also for a kind of introduction, not a bad thing, before leaving the floor to Ottilia. Why was it no money? Normally you don't have any money when you establish a commissioner, but it had been created under the auspices of the United Nations, but the United Nations said this was a commission established by an agreement between the guerrilla forces, the insurgent forces, and the government of Guatemala. And this is it. This is a national commission. So the prevailing opinion in New York at the United Nations was that, well, Guatemala should be burdened with the cost of the commission, which, by the way, was not a kind of salaries for the commissioners. The commissioners did not receive any salaries. It was, for me, just the accommodation and travel costs. Otherwise, there was nothing, no remuneration, but we needed staff, of course, to accomplish our duties. And fortunately, almost on the very first day of my presence in Guatemala, first of all, I had an encounter with Rigoberta Menchú, who came with some flowers, put them to me, gave them to me, welcome in Guatemala. That was one beautiful thing. The other thing was a visit of two ambassadors, the ambassador from Sweden and the ambassador from Norway, and they both told us spontaneously, we know that you do need money, that you could not accomplish your task without being funded, and each one offered us $1 million for our work, and they realized that, of course, we had to build an organization to provide everyone in Guatemala, the victims, with the real opportunity to appear before us, to talk about their bitter experiences during the armed conflict. And, well, that was a wonderful start, I must say. And I think one should be very grateful, the Guatemalan people in particular, to Norway and Sweden, countries that really did something. They do not only speak about human rights, but they do something for human rights. And other countries followed. The United States, of course, had to follow too, because as far as the history of Guatemala goes, that coup against Arbenz, they were the main responsible force behind those dictatorships, and they had always supported the military dictatorships. So the United States provided money. Canada also provided money. Germany also provided some money. There was a couple of good countries, but it took a great effort, to persuade them to finance the commission. And I personally, I must say, I must praise myself in this regard. I prompted Guatemala to pay some money too, because originally they said, well, this Truth Commission, this is a concern of the international community, and this is a matter for the international community to defray the cost, and why should we? But I could convince them, say, you must also get involved. This Tooth Commission is a metaphor. That's your matter. That's your concern. You must get involved. And eventually they paid, well, an amount which eventually came down to a little bit less than 10% of the total cost of the commission, which amounted eventually to roughly $10 million. Maybe I should stop here, and I think Ottilia should also take the floor to talk about this before we come to achievements and obstacles.